You're listening to the Entrepreneur's Agony Aunt podcast, keeping it real, telling the story like it is, because there are no mistakes that somebody else hasn't already made. Hello, I'm Vicky Brock, and you're listening to the Entrepreneur Agony Aunt podcast. My guest this week is Jo Swinson. She's Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrat Party, former Equalities Minister and Under-Secretary of State for Employment Relations and Consumer Affairs in the UK government 2010 to 2015. She has been an amazing advisor to me, and she was on the board of one of my companies for a while. Very much an accidental entrepreneur. She is now author of a book called Equal Power and How You Can Make It Happen. Knowing Jo personally, it's safe to say she gets stuff done, she makes an impact, and now she's enabling other people to make a really important impact. So welcome to the podcast, Jo.
Lovely to be here and chatting with you, Vicky,
well,
today.
Technically I'm with you in
that's
your
true.
office, but yes, you're not on the sofa, for which my housekeeping skills are quite grateful. There are two related questions this week, and I'm sure they will resonate with anyone who has found themselves either an accidental entrepreneur or worries that they are essentially unemployable. The first person writes, "The downside to running startups is when they fail, you become unemployable. I've now spent several years searching for employment, working as a consultant on temporary contracts and spending the rest of my time applying to many hundreds of jobs without success. With hindsight, I should have started another company when I had the money, but now I feel stuck spending my days thinking of how else I can get employed and trying new ideas as soon as they pop into my head. While I would love a board level role, I just need to bring in an income at this point. Can you help?" The second question, "I recently lost my job with a large company and I don't want to go back into that world. I have a startup idea I could make work and some useful skills. And I feel if I don't do this now, I never will. But I don't know where to start to meet people or make connections, and everybody does seem very young compared to me. Also, while I'm not under urgent financial pressure, I really don't want to be poor forever. Should I take the plunge?" So you know why I picked these questions for you, I suspect, but the listeners probably don't. So perhaps you could start by telling us a little bit about how you became an accidental entrepreneur, if you like, that experience.
Absolutely. So, I was a Member of Parliament, first elected at the age of 25. At that stage, I was the youngest Member of Parliament. So I'd worked a bit in business before that. I was a marketing manager for a radio station and then a digital media company. But politics is my passion, and I was elected for my home seat of Eastern Bartonshire in 2005, and I served as MP for a decade. And then in 2015, I lost my seat. And so I was then thrown into this world of, well, what do you do now when you're 35 years old and you have been an MP for 10 years, you have been, in my case, I've been a government minister for 3 years in the business department and Minister for Women. And of course I had marketing skills from before, but sort of going back into marketing, I was 10 years, out of the loop on all of the developments, and also, was unlikely to go back into a job or even be hired for a job at a sort of the same level in the organisation that I would have left, but obviously did not have the experience in that particular discipline or function. So I was thrown into, well, what do you then do? What does an ex-MP do? And so it didn't happen overnight, but I came to the conclusion that what I wanted to do was actually to be able to do my own thing, and so set up my own consulting business and learned a huge amount through the process of doing that, winning work, and particularly I was consulting on issues of workplace diversity. And then also doing a range of public speaking. I was on the board of Clear Returns, obviously, Vicky, as you know, and I also, chaired a charity. So I sort of did a mix of paid and pro bono work, and had a lot more flexibility, which is one of the things that attracted me to it.
It's a strange thing. I mean, the first person asking the question talks about being unemployable, and it was their words. Although I've used them a couple of times in previous podcasts. I use it in my TED talk. And Callie Russell at Molesey told me like he feels the pressure to get it right because he's going to be completely unemployable if he doesn't. And it's really weird thing when you come out of a highly pressured, highly skilled job that has been your life for all of this period of time. It wasn't until I read your book actually that I got any sense of just how many business skills going into running a constituency office, for example.
Yeah.
Then you're being a minister as well, and you're sort of like running the country. All these incredible skills, and yet you sort of sit there, probably not day one, but probably month one, going, what am I good for?
Yeah. Well, and I think what was really interesting, and it was frustrating, was the assumptions that other people make about what MPs do and about the skill sets MPs have. And it was interesting because I was going through this experience at the same time as my husband, who had also been an MP. He'd been an MP for less time, so he'd been there for 5 years, and before that he was a chartered accountant. He'd worked at Deloitte, and then he'd run his own consulting business. But he sort of was in the same situation where we're going off. We spoke to headhunters and recruitment companies, and we were applying for various jobs. And you would sort of get questions that assumed, for example, that MPs had no experience of working in a team, which of course is entirely contrary to what it's like when you're actually having to lead a team of volunteers as a candidate and a member of parliament. And obviously within a political environment, you don't get anything done if you're just doing it on your own. You have to be getting people's buy-in constantly and those different stakeholder relationships. But there really wasn't the assumption that you would know how to do that. Or when it comes to things like motivating staff, or people would assume also that MPs would be sort of diva-ish in some way. So there was a lot of these sort of assumptions that were effectively out there about what you could or couldn't do that you had to overcome before you even could get a hearing. And also because it's definitely in some ways an advantage to have that pre-existing brand, that people know who you are. But they know who you are, and they think they know who you are.
Yeah, oh yeah.
because they know you for having done X or Y. But then there's other things that you've also done that were much less high profile. So, for example, from my perspective, the equality things that I did were often very high profile because the media likes writing about them. But the work that I did, basically being the government's shareholder in the post office, because the government is the only shareholder in the post office, and as the minister responsible, and sort of managing that responsibility was something which didn't get nearly as much coverage, which was actually one of the success stories, because it's often an area which can go badly wrong for government, and so people wouldn't make that association. So I was actually having to fight with what people thought they were getting if they were considering giving me a job, and actually what my skill set in reality was. And I suppose it's similar for people who have maybe come from a particular route, then run their own business, however they've got there, and people then assume that that's what their skills are, and they might forget what they were doing 8 years ago, which might be deeply relevant to whatever role they're going for.
Yeah, it's a really frustrating thing. I think both of these questions are slightly different, but they both hit that. It's about not the skills that you have, because if you've run a company, but also if you've run a country, if you've run a constituency office, if you've been working in a corporate, you have a set of very appropriate skills that you can deploy. But it's the perception of that. I mean, I can't tell you the number of headhunters and people I've spoke to who've gone, oh, you're incredibly interesting, but impossible to place.
Yeah.
It's like, really? I've run a P&L, I've built a team, I've employed people, I've hired people, I've fired people, I've managed the fight. This is the bread and butter, as you will have done.
Yeah.
This was the bread and butter of my stuff. The bit that you're seeing, the shiny tech entrepreneur, the shiny minister, is literally the tip of the iceberg. Everything else is transferable. Definitely,
the conclusion I came to was that recruitment generally is so conservative with a small c, that the assumptions that are made, and sometimes this is by the headhunters themselves. To be fair, sometimes the headhunters I spoke to are genuinely trying to be much more diverse in the candidates they put forward, not just in terms of gender and ethnicity and all of those things which are important, but also in terms of background and somebody who's done something that is related but relevant but not the same thing. But they sometimes get frustrated when they put the candidates forward and the person doing the recruitment at the end of the day plumps for the safe option, the person who's done the same thing but in a slightly smaller company. And I do think that this attitude probably means that we lose out on some great talented hires in particular organisations. And as a country, that's not good for our economy, because you're then losing that potential innovation. But it's hard to get around that sort of safety first approach to recruitment, where people don't really feel that they can take any risk, or that they assume that there's no risk in somebody that's already done it somewhere else. But of course, there's no guarantee.
And the fact that they're available or looking to change is quite often a flag in itself. I feel for the first person who asked the question, says, that they feel torn between, on the one hand, like frantically trying to start whatever idea they come up with first, which I did my whole TED talk about. This is panic to do something, anything, because the thought of not is terrifying. Versus applying for all of these hundreds of jobs that they get knocked back from. I mean, I did a little bit of that, but I just gave up. My ego and my self-esteem couldn't take the pointless knocks. I just quickly went, right, you know what? I am unemployable in this sense of the word. Move on. Make my own. But then I realized that I had to do quite a lot of work to rebuild a brand, kind of rebuild that package. And I sort of, I have to say, shamelessly looked at what you did and copied a lot of it, because you kind of like went out and you joined new networks. You kind of like did your talks, you got on some panels, you went back to your own personal values and thought, well, what do I want to do? All that. So I copied a lot of that. What was the process you went through?
Well, so I remember the analogy that I used at the time was that for me it had felt like for 10 years my life had been, and my career had been on some very clearly defined tracks, because when you're in politics, you've got the timetable of, the parliamentary session, the elections, you've got local elections, you've got Scottish Parliament elections, you've got general elections, and, obviously when you come to an election, then there's a potential fork in the track because you don't know what the outcome's going to be, but you're generally on these pretty rigid train tracks. And when I lost my seat, that was one of the things that was simultaneously quite exciting and terrifying, that suddenly it was like the train track had stopped and the path forward therefore was not obvious and not clear, and I had to just make my own path. But I also was quite deliberate. The analogy I used was it felt like I was in a bit of a wild flower meadow and I was meandering through, and I was quite deliberate that I wanted to be opening up my horizons in terms of new people and new ideas. So I reached out to lots of contacts. I had so many cups of tea and coffees with people as part of that networking. I used to joke that it was like being on maternity leave, but with much less cake. And obviously without, the sleep deprivation in the same way. Because it was about, you don't know what opportunity is going to come from where. And so you really need to be open-minded. And I really enjoyed the luxury, if you like, of being able to do that. But at the same time, as the person who asked the first question says, you've got this pressure of income and that managing that, it means you can't really enjoy it. If I'd known, at the beginning of that time that I was going to have 2 years, there'd be a general election and I'd run and I'd win my seat, I'd probably have felt much more relaxed and be able to deal with with that time very differently. But I didn't feel relaxed about it, because there was this constant pressure of, but I've got a small child, my husband's also job searching at the moment, and so we do need to bring in an income, and it kind of came together like just at the right point. Somehow there was a serendipity to it. And
serendipity though only comes from creating opportunities. True. You created these situations.
Everything takes longer than you think. That was my big learning. You would expect that you had a meeting and something might come of it, but then to the person you've had the meeting with, who might be interested in having some kind of commercial relationship where you actually get paid, actually it's not top of their agenda, and then it takes 6 weeks, something else happens, something gets delayed, and before you know it, 5 months have passed. And so that was quite stressful. But then later, there's things that you've done months and months ago that suddenly come through. Somebody that you had coffee with that you didn't think anything was going to come of it rings you up out of the blue, and actually there's an opportunity that you can be involved in. So I think getting used to that slightly more random way of working, that if you put out enough feelers, you can't always know what will convert into a lead and what will convert into business for your consultancy or whatever your particular route is. But some of that will happen.
I think that's so important to both people. Both people asking these questions with slightly different nuances. They need to be out there with people, building a tribe, networking. But the frustrating thing, the difficult thing is you do not know how long it will take, and it is never directly synchronous. And you almost, if you sat there worrying about the direct reciprocity. You wouldn't do anything because it just doesn't work like that.
The advice I got, which was great, was always give first. So when you meet with somebody, you try to see, is there something I can give to you? Is there a connection that I've made in another world? Somebody else that I know that I've thought of, they would be a really interesting person for you to speak to. Or is there an idea? Is there a research paper that I've read? Is there is there something that I've come across that would be helpful to you as the person sitting opposite me that I can follow up our meeting with? And you sort of put that out into the world, and then some of it does come back. So that was really good advice that I got, and not to worry about every meeting having some immediate payback, because it won't. And if you start judging it all by that, then it's not going to work. But being very active and proactive about that networking.
And it's interesting you talk about having coffees and like it being minus the cake. I've unfortunately been doing too much of the cake, hence me being now much fatter now and no longer a full-time CEO. But that I just looked at having coffee as my job.
Yeah.
I mean, consultancy is a good middle-class way of saying I'm unemployed. But actually, at least it comes with a structure. And at least it comes with a means to expense that coffee if required. Because as part of your business development, because it is business development. It's just the business right now is you. You've not necessarily got to the next idea. Yeah. But that doesnn't mean that everything you're doing is not building the business of what you are. I mean, did you have a sense at the beginning that you would end up with the book, or did that come as part of the process?
The book was quite early on that I decided I wanted to do it. And I realised that would be something which would also, and again, it was advice that I got. I mean, I think it'd be hard to say write a book just to give yourself a brand or a calling card, as some people said, because as I discovered, it's actually a lot more work to write a book than I anticipated. I mean, it's not like I thought it would be easy, but it was a very intense process. But nonetheless, it is part of building a brand and credibility, on an issue, and of really setting out your stall. And it was a book I wanted to write because I really care about gender inequality, and I felt I'd learned a lot that I wanted to share, and I wanted other people to feel empowered that they could do things too, and that there was lots of ideas and ways people could do it that I wanted to put together. So that was quite early on. But I think what I hadn't quite realised about my business was how fluid it would have to be, because you start out with thinking you're going to do one thing, that maybe you'll go in and you'll give advice to companies in this way, but then you realise that another company wants a training workshop delivered. And so you just have to be quite flexible. And then once you've done something, you've suddenly got a bit of a product that you can replicate and do for somebody else. And I was still, if I'm very honest, I set up my business at the end of 2015. So, I ran it for 18 months. There was still a lot of development that I was doing. And I sort of called it productizing, like taking the things that I could do and putting them in the format that was easy for somebody to buy. And that was really hard to do at the very, very beginning. But once you'd actually done a contract with a particular organisation, it was a lot easier because you could draw on, what did I actually do? I even did the same for public speaking. I said, well, here are the different speeches that I can deliver. And obviously, anytime I would go and speak to an organisation, I could do something that was absolutely bespoke for them. But to make it easy for them to buy, it needed to be in a format that they could imagine the product. And it took me a while to learn that.
And it's really interesting when what you're productizing is yourself, because I think that's the bit I've been doing over the last year. And I kind of very similarly started off as like, well, here's some workshops I could do for you.
Yeah.
Here's some things I could speak about. Yeah. And I stuck them up on my website. And in some ways I kind of forgot about them a little bit. And then one day a big corporate rang up and said, yes, we'd like that workshop, please.
Yeah.
Crikey.
No, I can write it.
Actually for my website link. Yeah. But it was months and months later. But there were other things where I sort of found myself reusing content. It's actually, I've just done this talk at this thing. I hadn't been paid, but actually I wrote all the stuff. It was interesting. I'm going to make that available as a chunk. And even though I always had a bit of a thing about consultancy, like it's not a real startup. But actually it has been a really good way of surfacing and supporting ideas and earning some money. Yeah. Whilst, the next big one comes along.
I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, because obviously I was running my consultancy business when I was on the board of Clear Returns, and I did see the businesses as, obviously, in so many ways, very, very different. And, what you were creating was, something that's absolutely amazing piece of technology and IP, that can, create a huge amount of difference and value, and that is also very scalable. And of course, consultancy, I mean, that's one of the big challenges that, it's not at all in the same way. But nonetheless, I think a lot of the same principles in terms of, how you go out, how you actually, make business happen, and having to be very proactive and resourceful about that, is definitely a similarity.
Absolutely. It is quite interesting. What did you learn from that whole period that perhaps you've taken back into the old job? Well, the new version of the old job, I guess, and which was harder?
I think that one of the experiences that I sort of had was, I'd been doing the job of MP for 10 years. So I had, I'm not suggesting you stop learning, but I did feel like I was quite good at it. I'd learned a lot. I knew what I was doing, and particularly 3 years in government had really honed operating at that kind of senior political level. And then I was thrown into this environment where I didn't even know what the rules were. I didn't even know what the norms were. I would come to write a proposal, and I would actually send it sometimes to, friends that I had that worked in a professional services firm or something, and said, I have no idea pricing, how do you even go about working out what numbers to put on this?
Well, there's a podcast episode in itself, because everybody has that
exactly.
question.
And how do you present something, and what's anticipated, and how do you negotiate the contracts, all of which, I learned a lot over the months that I was doing it. Because it was just this massive learning curve, which I think was very healthy. And I also learned a bit more perspective, because when you're not living politics 24/7, you see it in a bit more of the way that, frankly, most people see it, which is, they catch the news at 10, or maybe they're in the car and they listen to the news on the hour. And so it's not all encompassing. Whereas when you're in politics and in government, you're living it daily, and it's harder to keep that sense of perspective. So I've tried to keep that in mind, having gone back into Parliament. But I think that perspective and that sense of learning new skills and putting myself outside of my comfort zone was probably what was particularly valuable about that time.
You talk about in your book plug your book. Quickly plug your book. Just quickly plug your book, because I keep talking about your book, but I haven't said it.
My book is called Equal Power, and How You Can Make It Happen. And it's all about what we can each individually do to improve gender equality. And it's got tales in there of what everyone from 17-year-old schoolgirls to 50-something male business leaders have done to improve the situation in terms of gender equality. So it doesn't matter who you are, you can make a difference on this. And there's loads of ideas in the book on what you can do.
And one of the interesting things you talk about is how your financial situation and your socio-economic background is such a barrier to politics. Because from campaigning, all the volunteering, all of that kind of thing, there's this real financial cost and risk that a lot of women, but a lot of people from non-privileged backgrounds simply unable or unwilling to make. And I think it's also super true of entrepreneurs.
Absolutely.
And startups. It's a really small privileged group of people that can afford to go, okay, I'm going to work for 18 months for free, and I've no idea if it's going to work, and heck, what's the worst that's going to happen?
Exactly.
If it all goes wrong. And the second person's asking, should I take the plunge? And I think it's one of those interesting, you and your husband both lost your jobs at the same time, young family. The financial risk and toll around the startup myth is very stressful.
I mean, there's no doubt about it, and I think a lot of other people are in much worse circumstances, particularly if you're talking about young people who are trying to take that plunge and they've not had any opportunity to, have any kind of investments or any previous, career or build up any kind of savings. So I entirely understand that. And I saw a tweet earlier today which just said, journalists, if you're writing a story about how some amazing entrepreneur beat the odds and got their product to market, and there's a sentence in it that says they were able to do it by a sizable gift of money from their parents, then just stop writing the article right there. And it's not to say that people who have that kind of privilege and rich background haven't done a great job as entrepreneurs, because many of them have. But as you say, they have had that head start in being able to do that. And as I say, I recognise, that compared to many people, actually, we were still, despite having both lost our jobs, a relative privileged position. But you do still worry about how you're going to pay the bills, and it's harder to be innovative when you're under that level of stress. And so I think, certainly for us, securing some even small regular income actually was a huge psychological support, because even if you're having to be very frugal, but if you've basically got a contribution each month to some of your costs being covered, then that sort of enables you to have a little bit more room to pursue the other opportunities. And I suppose for anybody in that situation, it is considering, everybody will have a different set of what their costs are, what their outgoings are, what their housing situation is. And that inevitably will be part of how they decide whether it's something we can do.
And I think it's a really important conversation you have to have as a family, and you have to think about, because the second person says all the entrepreneurs seem very young, and that's not true. Actually, it depends what network you're going out to. All of the entrepreneurs I work with are either I've got a group in their early 20s, but a lot of them are 40 plus and are coming out of corporate careers, or are feeling that that redundancy or some other circumstances triggered them doing this. It's not all about young people, but you certainly need to think about the finances of it really super carefully.
Another issue which I think is kind of interesting and relevant was one of the decisions my husband and I had to think about was what to do about childcare, because we had a young son. He's now 4, and he as well as losing our jobs, we obviously lost our place in the House of Commons nursery. That was probably one of the saddest goodbyes, was to sort of go and pick up the little, bag of, spare clothes. It's slightly sad. We had this sort of, I remember the discussion I actually had with my husband about this, and he was pretty clear, and he was absolutely right, that what we needed to do, and we did have some redundancy money to decide how to effectively invest in our future career, and one of the decisions we took very early on was to pay for childcare. And we had, until we got childcare sorted, this scenario where we were both trying to restart our careers, but while looking after our son. And so only one of us could be out at any given time. And it very clearly became apparent to us that was going to just hugely slow down what we were able to do in terms of all of that networking. And I think I took a little bit more sort of persuading that was something that was a sensible financial move, because it sort of felt like, well, that's not almost a necessary cost. But the point was trying to do that while full-time looking after a 16-month-old child, I think was going to be, incredibly difficult. And so I would encourage people, and again, people have got their own financial circumstances and thoughts, but to not make an immediate assumption about you can't afford to have any childcare whatsoever, because sometimes investing a bit in that might actually help you to have those meetings and so on that can land you that next opportunity much more quickly. And I think it was a really important decision that we made, actually.
That's really useful, and that's really helpful advice, because it's coming back to that serendipity that you talked about. Opportunity, opportunity doesn't come. You create 1,000,001 possible routes for it to fall towards you, and then you kind of keep going, hold your breath, try to survive financially and emotionally long enough for one of those channels to produce. And I think you're right. If you haven't created the environment, which is almost like to be able to work on that near full time, then the chances of those opportunities actually converting in the time frame are very remote. And that's even when you have the asset of a brand. My brand was not anywhere near as well known as you, but I'd been Innovator of the Year and top 10 of this and won a ton of stuff, so I still had that. And actually, it felt like it counted for nothing. I was as scared as anybody else. I was as financially worried. I still am. Although my husband said to me the other day, calm down. And if it gets really bad, actually tell people you wouldn't mind some paid work. That's a good plan.
Absolutely.
I should totally do that.
Well, this is the other thing, because it's this: how much do you do for free? I mean, which again, the number of people I had conversations about this.
Oh yeah, and I'm afraid I was one of those awful exploiters as well. Come be on my board and I can't possibly pay you. And in fairness, I'm now doing that for a lot of other people and they can't possibly pay me, and it's a good investment in myself.
Well, exactly. But I mean, I think there do need to be rules. And there was some great people that gave me advice that basically they even gave me sort of words to say, like, which I mean, the first time you spit them out is like, I usually charge for my time, or do you have a budget for this event? And obviously that's different when you're doing something for a charity or, as you say, an organisation that does not have the capacity. But when you're talking about big commercial organisations that ought to be able to pay for people's time. And when you're in a circumstance where you are, working for a startup that is paying you a salary, or you're in a salary job with a major corporate and you're invited to speak at a conference, well, obviously you wouldn't charge for going to speak at a conference because you're already being paid for your time. But when you are running your own business, then actually nobody's paying for your time, and so you do need to make your decisions. There might still sometimes be the odd opportunity that is just so amazing that you do it anyway, but if you create that expectation, I mean, I think this whole area is something which I suspect also there is a gender gap in how often men and women are expected to do things for free, or indeed how much they will accept doing things for free or challenge whether or not. Because the number of times I was also struck that when you do ask the question, that actually there can be a budget, because after all, they are paying for a budget for the event. They are hiring premises. They are giving people refreshments. Often people are paying to go to the event. But if they can get you for free,
they will. Commercial, except you. Yeah,
exactly.
Interesting. That's super good advice, and I'm totally mindful, that your lunch is still sitting over there, and of time. So thank you so much. You've been listening to Vicky Brock and Jo Swinson, this week's Entrepreneur Agony Aunts. You can subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or find out more at vickybrock.com/podcast.